Yes, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Professor Chaturvedi, for the invitation. It's my first time here at Delhi Process, but my third time in India, so I'm very happy to have the opportunity to come here again. And thank you, Elizabeth, for the presentation. You know each other for a long time, and that's why it's true I'm a soldier of South-South cooperation. I was in Buenos Aires in '78, so maybe I was too young there, and I don't know if I'm too older here now. I'm wondering. But being 40 years, 40 years has passed, and I'm wondering, maybe in a nostalgic way, what is if the South-South cooperation spirit is still alive. And so my presentation would take some points from the micro level of my colleague. I'm going to just point out the macro level. So I'm just taking some points of the presentation to talk about challenges, to talk something about institutionality, and also emerging challenges of endogeneity of knowledge and globalization, the tension between endogeneity knowledge and globalization. Well, concerning so I will try to make only 3 points because we don't have that much time, but I would be glad to talk on the afterwards. The first point is that I think that the present international scenery is changing dramatically, and if we really don't take into consideration these changes, no matter how innovative our instruments could be, it's very difficult that we could match discourse with realities. So I think we need to be aware of the present conditionalities of the international challenges. And to this point, or to make clearer this point, I just take the item 5 of the outcome of the BAPA plus 40 conference, that there is a very optimistic forecast of the present international conditions. It's saying that this is a moment that create conditions conducive to promote it, South-South cooperation, and pursuing sustained economic development, blah, blah, blah. I think really, to be honest, this is far, far from the present conflictive situation we are living on. Not only in the sense of the actors and non-state actors, but conflict is really, it's unpredictable. Unpredictable is, it's in English. It's unpredictable in the area of security, commercial, financial, political issues, putting at stake all our principles and objectives concerning the sustainable development goals. And moreover, what Minister Tirumurti has pointed out, there is an important digital divide, unilateralism and protectionism. So this is not quite an easy environment, and I think we should be aware of these conditionalities when we think how to cooperate and when we think how to relate to each other. The second point, I just leave just the points. I'm not going too deep in. Second point is the issue of institutionality and endogeneity. Institutionality is a political issue. It's not, we cannot take it for granted easily. Institutionality means agency. And what does it mean? Who will run the institutions at the international, regional, and domestic levels, in the case of givers and in the case of recipients? if we look to history, Thucydides is still alive. And thinking about international relations, the powerful are still organizing the game. So what will be the incentives for them to change? And even in the South, there is also a Southern divide that is very well pointed out by Professor Brache when in his article about the divide between Southern providers and the rest of the developing countries. So the scenery is not so linear, and also there is a problem with the recipients, because which are the recipients? The elites, the government, the state, or we should add civil society, and how and when can we empower civil society to the extent that has a real say in international issues? Because this is, and the forecasts are not optimistic, taking into consideration the present trends. Concerning endogeneity, there is also a strong tension between endogeneity of knowledge and globalization. What does globalization mean? Does globalization mean the respect for diversity, or means homogenization? One size fits all. So there is a tension that we should be aware that it will exist, and the divide is each time deeper, bigger. The third point is the enlargement. There has been an enlargement of concepts, an enlargement of actors, and an enlargement of issues from the very beginning up to now. In the enlargement of concepts, if we think the 78 or the 60s up to now, we were thinking of third world, and concepts were solidarity and horizontality, technology. Then we think of the 70s, and it was technical cooperation, and it was South-South cooperation, and it was technology as a waterfall in cascade, and that was an interesting concept we should take into account even now. Then the concept disappeared in the 80s and even in the 90s to appear again as Global South. All of a sudden, and as a consequence of globalization, the South, that was an original concept, was diluted within the South, within the concept of Global South. And finally, we have a third concept, that's global, it's South-South cooperation plus TRC, triangular cooperation. And although I'm hosted in a conference that the title is South-South and Triangular Cooperation, I just put an alert on this triangular concept and of this triangular intervention, because maybe some would be tempted to transform or to convert the South-South cooperation plus triangular cooperation into only one compact. And I think they are different things. So triangular cooperation, I think, is very much welcome, but we should be alert. We should be aware that if we don't have we are not keen on this issue, maybe we could finish by having a Trojan horse in the South-South cooperation. So, may it be that South-South cooperation would lose its meaning and its sense and run the risk of disappear in a new concept, or just being cooperation. I mean, if you mix all the different intersections, well, we just cooperate and use the old word and don't put titles to things that are not what they should be. So, the enlargement of the concept is something to take into account and to have an eye. And have an eye? No, you say have an eye? Put an eye. Be aware. Sorry for my... be aware of what we are thinking or doing. Because, and although I'm not theoretically speaking constructivist, I can say that if we create concepts, these concepts create ideas. And these ideas are spread. And then we finally are thought as something that's real, and it's an illusion. So just be alert on what we think about the concept of South-South cooperation. Also, it's very interesting, the enlargement of actors, and I applaud the enlargement of actors from the very beginning. That's only the state. We need an enlargement. But also, there is also a tension between solidarity and interests. And it has to do also with trade and with financing. Sometimes trade, well, I remember that the African countries said, for example, no, we don't want aid, we want trade. Afterwards they say, no, they don't want trade, we want fair trade. But even fair trade is not fair. It's not so fair. So this is another tension between even financing. I mean, sometimes we put in the same bag all that has to do with loans, credits, finance. And I think we have to be keen in separating the waters and or maybe troubled waters. And in Spanish there is a saying that says, don't mud the waters, or something like that, no? So we should be keen on that, just to preserve, because for at least in my sense that I think I'm a scholar, or I feel a scholar, and I feel that I can't just separate from the official discourse to my own thinking, and there won't be any problem. This is not the case sometimes for some officials, and I understand their position too. So we should be keen on the enlargement of ideas, concepts, actors, and how it works. If not, we run the risk of, and I quote Milindo in this sense, let the idea not be caged into some defined templates and lead to potential death by strangulation. So, thank you very much.
Well, that's a brilliant way of ending. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gladys. I think the historical reflection, I think, also highlights the importance, the context in which we have to discuss some of the instruments. I'm going to ask Professor Rahman to take the podium from Dhaka. I think you'll also bring in some LIC perspectives, into LDC perspectives into the discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Let me first begin by expressing my profound thanks to my very good friend, Dr. Sachin Chaturbedi, my colleagues at RIS, and all the organizers over here. When I first met Sachin, I was not old, but bold promoter of South-South cooperation. Now I am old, but not bold promoter of South-South cooperation. I tell it because we are sitting here in New Delhi, and we have been able to talk about South-South cooperation without uttering the word SAARC, which is the body which was supposed to promote the cooperation within our South Asian countries. So that also speaks about the difficulties and the emerging challenges in our region. And I bring that because I think that this session will focus on, emerging challenges and innovative instruments. So I would like to bring the perspective of the least developed countries over here and see how we can make South-South cooperation work for the least developed countries. Now, if you recall, the least developed countries were identified among the developing countries as a substrata of countries which needed focused attention and support in 1971. And at that time, there were 25 least developed countries. As we speak now, we are 47 least developed countries. That speaks about the state of support that was promised in 1971 to help those countries to develop. Okay. Now, as per the decision of the decadal program of action which was accepted and endorsed in Istanbul in 2011, the number of LDCs is supposed to halve by 2021. So now, many of the LDCs have been slated for graduation. And in South Asia, we are 4 LDCs, Afghanistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh. And out of those 4 LDCs, 3 LDCs are supposed to graduate by 2021 or 2024. So, you see, it's a whole new scenario which is coming for the South Asian LDCs and also for other LDCs, because already 15 LDCs are identified for graduation, and by 2022-23 there will be another. So having the number, meaning that there will be 24 LDCs which will be graduating in the next few years. Now, what does this mean? Now, for example, take Bangladesh. It would mean that Bangladesh, which gets duty-free, quota-free market access in all the developed countries, and also as part of, for example, SAFTA, South Asian Free Trade Agreement, we also get, India provides duty-free, quota-free to all the 4 LDCs in SAARC. So this would mean that by 2024, there will be no duty-free, quota-free market access for the least developed countries. Now imagine if Bangladesh now exports this T-shirt or this shirt to European Union, there is a 12% duty in the European Union. We don't have to pay it. So their preferential margin is quite significant. By 2024, there will be no preferential margin. We will have to compete with other countries. So you see the challenges. And not only that, for example, let's take, TRIPS, trade-related intellectual property rights. Pharmaceuticals, Bangladeshi pharmaceuticals, they provide 95% very low-cost medicine to our country and exports to more than 65 countries. Why? Because under the TRIPS decision of the WTO, we don't have to pay for the patenting and licensing. So once we are out of the LDCs, we will have to do that. What will be the cost of the medicines? One can think about that. So all these scenarios will be changing over the next few years. So, and as I said, not only in the context of the developed countries, but also in the developing countries with which we have, like India providing us zero tariff under the SAFTA. So the whole, the scenario will be changing. And at what time? And we have discussed in all the panels this morning that the emerging global scenario is becoming very challenging. You see, the rise of the mega regionals, plurilaterals, WTO non-reciprocity, special and differential treatment for the low-income countries, all these are changing. So we are graduating at a time when the global environment is very unfriendly. Second, we are also making a second graduation, which is that many of the LDCs, including my country, also are making a second graduation, which is that we have, by income criteria, we have transited from low income to lower middle income country. Now, lower middle income country means that you are no longer eligible for example, World Bank's IDA type of loan, which is 0.75%, less than 1%. We will have to now get loans, and we have already started getting loans at non-concessional rates of 5 to 6%. Now 5 to 6 times, in fact 7, 8 times more, the cost of aid. So, a large number of least developed countries, all of them in the south, if you exclude Haiti, 32 are African LDCs, and the rest 14 are from our region, ESCAP and Asia Pacific region. So this is a whole new game. So I would say identify this as a major emerging challenge. Now what can be the instruments? Now I have already said, for example, one instrument could be that can India think about extending for the graduating LDCs a time-bound extension of the preferential treatment, for example. In UN, there is a resolution under which, in fact, the European Union, under the Everything But Arms initiative, which provides zero tariff for the LDCs, they have extended it for 3 years. So once you graduate, they, as a support to graduating LDCs, they will give duty-free, quota-free for additional 3 years. For example, for Bangladesh, it will be 2027. So can we think about a global package of, a southern package of support for the graduating LDCs in the context of, for example, the SAFTA and other regional initiatives. And not only SAFTA, we are also doing a lot of bilateral and plurilateral various types of initiatives within SAARC. We have already signed the motor vehicle agreement between India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan. Bangladesh is importing electricity from India. We are now having various transport connectivity, investment connectivity. So can we have a support mechanism within South-South cooperation paradigm for the graduating LDCs? Because this is a very large number of countries, 24 countries within next few years who will be losing the preferential market access, all the special and differential treatment under the TRIPS streams, etc., etc. So this will be one way of really effectualizing South-South cooperation. The other next point that I would say is that can we also think about a southern support in the context of the WTO negotiations for a package of support to the graduating LDCs. I am telling that is time-bound support, not for eternity. It's a time-bound just so that in the context of the global scenario that is emerging, recession and then plurilaterals, multilaterals, so that it is a time-bound support for the graduating LDCs in the context of the WTO also. Can we have a southern, support? It will strengthen. We have already mooted the idea in the WTO, and as you know, the ministerial conference is coming in Astana in 2020 June, and we will be taking that. So can we have, because all these graduating LDCs are southern LDCs, okay? Southern countries from the global south. So can we have a very concerted support from the southern countries that WTO accepts a package of support for the LDCs? So I think that these will be some of the initiatives within the region, in the global south, within South Asia also, in the context of, as I said, various initiatives, very good initiatives that we are having, just to extend those in a time-bound manner, and going to the global arena in various platforms for these countries. Because I am afraid that if we don't have that package of support, we will not be able to have sustainable graduation. And why I am really concerned about my country for one particular reason. There are 3 criteria for graduation, but there is a 4th criteria. No new LDC will have population of more than 75 million people. Now, Bangladesh is the only LDC which has a population of more than 75 million people. So for us, graduation is a one-way journey. We will not, even if we do not, we fall down under the criteria, we will not be able to come back as an LDC. So I think that, but that apart, I think these graduating LDCs, this is a recognition of their economic growth as well. So, but there needs to be support so that they can graduate sustainably with momentum. So I think that point should be very strongly made. We also will have the 5th program of action in Qatar in support of the LDCs in 2021, LDC 5. So going forward to that also, I would like to put this on table, that this large group of countries, so that they can graduate with momentum and with the graduation is sustainable. So that is my point. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much. Two very concrete points around trade, and of course also an interesting mechanism in the case of Mexico and migration. And I think the point has also been raised in the morning sessions around using particular types of measures and how these can actually make things worse, not actually make things better. And it's not quite like the English Premier League if you graduate. In your case, you can't ever fall back into the second league, and that's the challenge. All right. Let me ask my colleague Stefan then to put some...
We look for. Oh, great, it's now connected. Good. The first pass was not recorded. Maybe that's an advantage. Okay. Why do we need innovations and new instruments? Just two very basic aspects, but I think it's good just as a reminder. I think in this regard we have two main challenges. The first one is that we have challenges today which are really interrelated, and I think we all know it, but just to give you one example, the climate change is pushing the southern border of the Sahara further south. This is an issue per se, but with a number of implications when it comes to migration, implications when it comes to the security situation of the whole Sahel region. So this kind of interrelation is something what is really crucial. I think the Agenda 2030 and its SDGs are reflecting this in a quite good way, I would say. This is really great. The main challenge is for South-South cooperation, for triangular cooperation, for traditional donors, for everybody. What does it mean in operational terms? So I think we are still struggling with this kind of, we have a sector approach, a silo. We want to tackle the energy issue in a country, and then it becomes already, much more narrow. So what I'm saying here, this is one aspect why we need innovations in this regard. And the other one is just looking at what kind of institutional structure do we have on a global level. I think we all know that the institutional architecture is still dominated by those institutions created at the end of World War II and at the beginning of, the phase after World War II. And that was mainly a situation where governments and heads of state were sitting together and thinking, okay, we need Bretton Woods institution, United Nations, and all these things. I'm not complaining about this, but what I want to say, this is a situation where governments were sitting together and thinking about what is a good solution for an issue, and that was probably appropriate for that time. I mean, just looking at some main international conferences, and of course I'm now part of the United Nations, I'm not going to criticize anything, but sometimes I have the impression it's good to have those government representatives, and they are doing their best, but do I really expect that the solution for this problem is coming from this forum today? I have sometimes some doubt. So what I want to say is actors beyond government in the public sphere and, of course, in the private sphere are crucial when it comes to problems, yeah? Just thinking about climate change, but also for solution findings. And I think the last panel before we started here was a perfect example in this regard, private sector, etc., etc. In a way, again, everybody can agree, yes, let's try to bring together members of parliament and private sector and civil society organization, etc., etc. But in very practical terms, it's very often difficult to find solutions with those multi-actor constellations. Just to give you one example, private sector, regardless whether the private sector is coming from the global south, from the north, or from elsewhere, they need to have a strong incentive. Why should they participate somewhere in a meeting? Then there need to be a very concrete benefit. What I want to say is we have this kind of challenge that issues are really closely interrelated, and we have this kind of challenge that actors need to collaborate to a much larger extent. What I'm now going to do is not to give to you the perfect solution for it, but just some indication what I think should frame our thinking. And I'm not claiming that everything is totally new, so to some extent it's already here, and maybe it's even to some extent also informed by what I'm doing since 2.5 months. Also some new insights. So and I have 5 brief points. The first one is I think we need much more strategically planned beyond track 1 options. Beyond track 1 means, I mean, you might know it from the conflict debate. Track 1 is government, they will find a perfect solution. And if we are thinking about beyond track 1 would bring in other actors. And I think daily process is a perfect example that daily process is, you know, track 1.5, and track 2, because you have think tank representatives, you have government representatives, you have other scholars, you have civil society. This is probably the format we need much more in a more sophisticated way. And maybe especially actors from the global south should also think about how can we bring more incentives that those things are taking place in the global south with resources from the global south, that the whole debate is not mainly dominated by government representatives. Again, this is needed, but to bring really a big push for solutions, we need something beyond this. And just to one other example, and this is why I'm also very glad to see that on Saturday this collaboration between universities is a very crucial aspect. But still, I don't see it as a very strategic approach when it comes to, you know, this kind of debate in a more general sense. My second point, I would label it orchestration of multi-actor approaches. That means if you want to bring together those actors, of course, you can invite them, you can provide incentives saying, oh, we are going to a great location, nice resort, never, you know, this kind of incentive, but you need to have something more, that those actors really collaborate. Thank you. And for this, you need a specific ability that you can orchestrate, that you have a soft way how to provide a governance structure to this. And if you would ask me for you know, more concrete examples, I could do it, but it's really not an easy thing, because quite often there is a strong political economy in place why actors are not participating, or participating, but let's say with a limited interest really to provide resources for those processes. My third point is, and I think South-South cooperation is in many regards delivering on this, we should look for very tangible approaches. How to get beyond a pure talk shop approach. And in this regard, I really find the daily process a very innovative format to make it visible what is already taking place. And in this regard, just to pick up some examples where I think we could make it a more systematic way. The whole cooperation on the subnational level. I think this is really a huge topic. I mean, you have urban areas like Delhi or now Seoul. We are collaborating from my center with the city of Seoul. You have, this kind of urbanization issue in almost all countries. This will increase. So we need to have much more a good understanding how those subnational actors can contribute to something. With the cities of Seoul, I already started some kind of brainstorming. It should be not just between, city of Seoul as part of the global north since 2009, but also, within the OECD world. And, why not just to think about something not north-south, but also south-north would be also probably something very innovative, where southern urban areas can contribute to finding solutions for northern urban areas. My friends expected already that I'm always coming up with something around Rwanda. Last time I was in July in Rwanda, and I think Rwanda is very great. Quite often, I mean, it's not paradise, but one very interesting thing is that they have what they call homegrown solutions for a number of different topics, and they just created last year, at the end of last year, what they call Rwanda Cooperation Initiative, which is a it's they label it. This is our approach for South-South cooperation. In many regards, it's different from, let's say, other discussions. And what I want to say is, if you are looking at those quite new ways how to organize different ways of South-South cooperation, you can find a number of very fascinating things. I could continue, maybe just two last examples, but this is just to contribute to the long list of very innovative things. I just found out that Afghanistan, India, Korea, we have a very interesting collaboration on police. There are so many fascinating things. One aspect we are also dealing at my center in Seoul is gender-based violence and how we can contribute to different situations, especially in countries of the global south, conflict-affected countries, etc. When it comes to this very crucial topic, which is crucial, I think, for almost all countries in the world, especially conflict-affected, but to have a country with a very, let's say, very special historical background and experiences, which might be helpful in different contexts, is something what is very important. So my point here, which I wanted to make, is those tangible solutions are probably most important, or something what is really essential. My fourth point, and I just need another 60 seconds and I'm done. I think this whole thinking about an integrative approach, this is big homework for all of us. I just mentioned this kind of, interrelated issues. We have it in all areas. I think most of our solutions when it comes to cooperation approaches is still very much, we have a specific expertise in this area, and we are not able really to bring it together. At UNDP, we have a big discussion about UNDP as a SDG integrator, and I think it's a very fascinating discussion. At the same time, what is also clear, it's not easy to define this kind of role, and I think we should really try to have something like terms of reference, how we can deal with this kind of homework. My last point, this kind of discussion on triangular cooperation and also new ways of cooperation, and Mario Pezzini he's around, and what I want to say here is triangular cooperation is for me one option how to think a bit beyond development cooperation formats. And this would be especially the case if we would just have a larger agreement that triangular cooperation is not just to have 3 actors, you know, this kind of triangle, but it's rather a quite sophisticated approach for complex solution approaches where a different set of actors can come together. It might be not always that we have 3 governments, you know, 2 south and 1 north and something like this. It could be also, you know, one enterprise, civil society organization, and a government from the south or from the north. So it's rather a different thinking that we need to bring together in a different way actors to find solutions. And if we would take this as a starting point, I think triangular cooperation would have a much more high potential for our debate compared to a situation, and I know that many people, including Jorge Chediek and others, are not, you know, sticking to something where, you know, 3 partners, 2 from the south and north. It's for many of them, it's not like this, but implicitly, I think it's still dominating a lot of our discussions. So what I want to say is, why not to take triangular cooperation as a very positive, constructive way to frame new ways of cooperation. Thank you, and sorry for taking so long.
Thanks very much. Stefan? Let's move then on to Sanusha, and let's see if we can also squeeze in some time to get some questions.
I'll be as brief as possible. The nice thing coming last is that I can say everything has been said and not say too much. I succeed my 2 minutes. Firstly, thank you to Sachin for the invitation. It's also very nice to be here to see the inception of the Delhi process, and having been to most of the Delhi process conferences, I think it's quite innovative to see the way in which the dialogues have evolved. The other thing I want to say is I'm not going to delve too much into what has been said throughout the morning and the afternoon sessions and in this panel, but I think the one thing that we all can agree on is that we want to see change in the way the world works. And that change is the commonality that brings us all together. The challenge or the difficulty is, how do we get there? And we talk about dialogues, we talk about knowledge of instruments of knowledge, questions of cooperation, collaboration, and so forth. But the challenge is really whether we're speaking in the context of whether we want to be in a framework where we all are willing to give up some of our rights and some of our power to arrive at that situation. And that's what struck me today about all of the panels. It was, there's no dispute about the fact that there is consensus. The challenge is in the actual arrival on how do you actually implement the consensus. And so this reminded me of a very important thing that has been an underlying current throughout the day and perhaps throughout the discussion in the next 2 days, and that is, we live in a world where inequality has been exacerbated. We may have been able to lift people out of poverty, but I don't think we've been able to reduce the inequality gap between the haves and the have-nots. And very interestingly, it is that inequality gap which essentially is expanding at a rapid rate, because the world, in the way that the structural conditions of the world we live in today, is expanding in such a rapid way that it's also becoming inhospitable to our societies that you want to be left behind. And in a sense, we live in a society where there is a precariat in every country of the world. We have those that live on the margins of their socioeconomic rights. They live on the margins of their access to their material status. They want to be part of the space, but how do they get there? And this is what makes South-South cooperation and the issue of triangular cooperation quite interesting. The question is, how do we use the debates and the knowledge that we have thus far without reinventing new instruments, but innovating on existing instruments? And the big question here is not just about innovation, but it's about adaptation and innovation. Because I think we don't have to go back and reinvent policies. It's about how do we adapt policies to the structural conditions of the world we live in. And this brings me to the very important point I think all of the panelists were saying, is that the world is, we don't have time. Time is actually against us, whether we talk about climate change or how climate change will exacerbate the conditions of society, the conditions of cities. We're going to enter into major metropoles. Where one city ends and another city begins is going to become much more, a greater diffusion. People are going to be even internal migration, not just to where there is developed economies or going to, as we saw in the case of Mexico, as we see in the case of Asia, they're going to be migrating within themselves as well. And so the challenge for us is, how do we get to that point where the state or the government is not the only provider of those rights? That you have to find another way of doing things? Or do we actually start thinking about the resources and so forth? So if time is running out with the instruments we have, patience is running out because people are not willing to sit idly by and still expect the delivery to take place. They want their action now. And I think that, for me, is the question of the track one diplomacy, is we talk of all of these issues around the SDGs, the implementation of South-South cooperation agreements, etc., and we're willing to talk about the change. The question is, are we willing to change? Are we willing to actually change the discourse, the narrative, and the so-called power game that underlines the tensions about whether you are going to basically keep your borders closed off to others? Are you going to graduate, but graduate based on a particular time-bound issue with regard to moving from a least developed or a least income country to a middle income country? We don't have the time. And neither do the electorates or the population. They want to be able to be part of that. And it's quite interesting if you actually think about it, because what we are dealing with is not so much a question of whether the instruments need to be sophisticated or whatever. It's very simple. People want to be able to be part of the game. They want to be able to enjoy the access to their resources. And I think the challenge we have is we're talking about the same thing, but the challenge is that you need resources to innovate, you need resources to adapt, and you need to invest. The question then becomes is, how do you do that? And right now, the polarization in terms of the knowledge is that one set of knowledge is becoming the dominant paradigm. The question is, how do you change the dominant paradigm around innovation, inclusion? And I think that's what we haven't heard too much about. Inclusion in the process around the kinds of rules-based system, whether it's the WTO, whether it's the G20, whether it's the Global Governance Compact, etc. And I want to end on this point because I know I'm kind of running out of time. I took 6 minutes instead of 4. The challenge is, I think, what we saw in this very conference that had started in 2013 is how it innovated with different experiments and instruments around cooperation. Starting off with what I thought was quite interesting with the FIDC, the Forum on Inter-Indian Development Cooperation, a homegrown base that kind of innovates on trilateral cooperation. It's not talking about with another country or a third country or 3 countries or whatever. It was actually domestic development cooperation that was taking place within. And I think that kind of moves the debate away from just looking at the public-private sector engagement as well. And I think when we think about where we are now with regard to development cooperation, that's what each country needs to think about, is how to develop and innovate and adapt to domestic conditions that also reacts to global conditions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sunusha. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one round of questions. I'd like you to be brief, succinct, and then we'll revert to the panel and then also ask the ambassador to round up with some of his comments. Right, let me see hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Closed. Okay, so let's start with Andre. Where's the mic? Right, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you all the panelists for very interesting discussions. I'll try to be very brief. I have 2 questions. The first one is for Gerardo. I think that the case that you described is very interesting in many ways. I think first that it shows the externalization of a domestic policy that was successful in Mexico, and Brazil does that all the time as well. Policies that are successful domestically are tried to be replicated elsewhere. But the main challenge you have here is to prevent the politicization of the granting of these cash transfers. In other words, that local governments or even central governments in the partner countries will not just give the transfers to their friends or to their electoral bases or what have you. And for that purpose, you need a very objective criteria for granting these transfers. And typically it comes in the form of income, but you can have others as well. And interestingly enough, then you'll create consolidated interests there. And the populations receiving these benefits, they'll start pressuring their own governments to deal with Mexico to keep the cooperation ongoing. So again, thanks for that. I think it's very interesting. And another issue I'd like to raise, and it's come up in several of the presentations as well as in the previous panels, has to do with the institutionalization of innovation, so to speak. If we have conservative governments, as Elizabeth said, we need institutions that will somehow reward innovation. And if we want to have that in South-South cooperation, we need some way to measure impact, and that has also come up in Shediak's presentation this morning and presentations by others as well. We need some sort of impact assessment, if you will, so that we can know which practices need to be rewarded and to have a built-in system that will favor innovation and that will also keep it going in the long term. Thanks.
Okay, great. I'll take that as a comment, not a question per se. There was the one hand there, and then there was the lady over there, and then I'll come back to you, and then let's close it. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Noel Gonzalez. I am as well from Mexico, so I wanted to make a couple of comments after the several interventions. First, I'd like to thank my friend Gerardo, who depicted very well what we are doing in Central America. I just wanted to add that we are working with the local governments in order to build what Andre was also mentioning, a very objective set of rules that are going to help us implement these programs in the most effective and efficient manner. But we are going beyond this logic of South-South or this logic of a provider, a southern provider and a recipient. We are working, and that I'm not sure how it goes with the way Ms. Gladys Leccini depicted as well South-South cooperation as something very different from other forms of development cooperation, because we are working with northern countries, with traditional providers, but we are also working with the UN system. We are working with other regional organizations that are present on the ground beyond the UN system. We are working with the multilateral development banks. We are working with the private sector. We are working with civil society organizations. So basically, we are putting in a big mix everybody. And we are trying to organize the efforts, because these three programs that Gerardo referred to are only the beginning, but we are trying to build a broader portfolio of projects that are going to help the situation, are going to help to change the situation on the ground profoundly. That's our goal. And hopefully in the next daily process meetings, we're going to let you know if that worked or not. But we are working in a comprehensive manner. And basically, we are not making much of a difference in between South-South, North-South, triangular, multilateral forms of cooperation. We are really trying to build this comprehensive approach and framework. So from that's a very practical approach, because we want to be really have an impact on the ground, but I don't know how it comes down when you see it from an academic perspective, because we are not making much of a difference. I'm
Great.
afraid.
Thanks very much. If I can ask you just to pass the mic, okay, to the lady at the back there. Is yours a question or a comment? It's a question. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is directed to any of the panelists on an issue that Dr. Naidu touched on the issue of climate change. In my view, the issue of climate change is really impacting negatively on most of us developing countries. Not only is it affecting lives, it's unraveling the benefits that maybe have been made in terms of poverty eradication, food security, energy production. So I'm wondering what the countries of the South, in South-South cooperation, what innovative instruments can they utilize to sort of fight climate change, especially when we take into consideration the lack of common position on the global stage by some of the big actors on the issue of climate change. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And then lastly over here. Is that a question or a comment?
No, comment is.
Okay, excellent. We have one question. We should move
I am
quickly.
Dr. Arun Thakur. I am from Nepal, Tribhuvan University. And my opinion is, no country is self-sufficient in their resources. And resources is generally related to their own resources, and the human resources are. The problem is, the challenge is, what type of resources that country have, right? In terms of their land, their other resources like the water, like the forest, and the most important factor is the human resource. Then if the challenge is, once you talk about the cooperation, then what is the real situation of that very country? They are to be assessed first. What is their need? They are to be assessed. What are their resources which can be exploited in an efficient manner so that cost can be reduced and the cost of the product can be reduced so that we can compete in a global context. So the matter is, the challenge is how to utilize their resources, how to make the human resources efficient there, so that we can exploit resources or utilize the resources in an efficient manner, so that cost can be reduced and we can compete in the global context. So the matter is how to make, before going to cooperation, all these factors are to be assessed, and then we have to join the hands among the South-South or taking the cooperation of the triangular cooperation. What type of cooperation is required, then we have to assess it, and then we have to join the hands to face it.
Great.
That is
okay.
the good.
Thank you very much. All right, so there's one question, and that was the question on climate change and South-South strategies around that, mitigating it, and I don't know who would like to respond. No, 4 questions, that's it. Who would like to respond? Who has a concrete response to that question? Would you like to take it, bro? No, there's no last question. Oh, you want to take the... No, that's a comment.